right, so Kylie Jenner as George Soros just tanked Snapchat with a single comment. What was the story on that? Ian, I think you know more. I think you've been following. You're more of a Kylie Jennerite than I am.
Yeah, total big follower of Kylie. Just love her so much and everything that she does. So I don't
God
really
help
know what
us.
she does other than try to look hot. But anyways, so she made a tweet today saying, and I quote, "So does anyone?" So with 3 O's, really good speller there. So does anyone else not open Snapchat anymore, or is it just me? Ugh, this is so sad. End quote. That caused Snapchat's stock to drop by $1.2 billion. Oh my god.
Billion.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Oh man, this is like the time that
celebrities have these days is insane.
This is like
the
the
power
time
of speculation in the social media market.
Just like when Brian Ross made that false report on Michael Flynn and alleged Russian connections, and boom, stock market tanks by multi-billion dollars. Now we've gone from.
That?
Oh wait, hold on. Sorry, I'm looking right now. 11 minutes after she made the initial tweet, she said, "Still love you though, Snap, my first love."
11 minutes.
Oh my god, that's her that's the conciliation for tanking their stock is like a heart emoji. Sorry,
I totally just cost you. I cost you $600 on an expensive date, but I still love you.
This is the real story, because I know that there's this whole there's a web of conspiracies that's evolving around the Florida shooting about David Hogg, and we're going to talk about not the conspiracy, but we're going to talk about the shooting later. But I think this is the real conspiracy, that Kylie Jenner is actually an agent of George Soros here to destabilize the American social media market.
If there's any family in our pop
culture,
have
something there, Pepe.
I think I could. I think that's the. She's a social media crisis actor.
If there's any family in our pop culture that would be that role, it's the Jenners and the Kardashians, man. But at the same time, must we be honest with ourselves? We're all thinking the same thing about that awful update. So maybe she's not far off the mark, honestly.
I don't even use Snapchat.
Well, I don't even have Snapchat, so I have no idea what the hell is going on.
My buddy at UCLA convinced me to get
hold on.
it.
Let's not give the Jenners this podcast. All right, let's get
fair,
back on
fair.
track.
Let's get working then.
So big deal. Kind of a shot in the foot, so to speak, to this whole narrative of well, if we get rid of the Second Amendment, it'll be fine because police will keep us safe. And it's nothing to disrespect law enforcement. Like everyone here in this podcast is very appreciative and pro law enforcement. But
Blue Lives Matter.
Right, yeah. But, it just came out that this deputy who was on duty during the Florida shooting resigned because he had waited for 4 minutes outside the building while the shooting was going on.
That is a lifetime in school.
Yeah, it is.
240 seconds.
Shootings last from between 7 and 15 minutes. School shootings.
That is a lifetime. He could have saved multiple lives in that time frame, and he didn't. I don't know what was going through that guy's head, whether he was paying attention. I have no clue. But that guy is in deep shit now.
He should be.
I mean, he resigned.
Oh my lord.
Well, part of me thought, maybe because I know that I've seen some defenses saying, well, it's they're trained to do that. They're trained to not go into these active shooter situations unless they're in groups. But I think that doesn't qualify.
No.
Because there's instances always of police officers acting on their own in situations like this. And so, and I mean, the fact that he resigned, that kind of shows that he knows why he didn't go in there. It was, but that really kind of bunks the whole we can disarm ourselves because law enforcement is always going to be there for us.
Yeah, I mean, because you had that in the Vegas shooting too. You had that security guard who went in and confronted the guy, and that guy was way more armed to the teeth than this Florida shooter was, and he got injured, but at least he tried. I mean, good Lord in heaven.
Yeah, well, again, I think the sheriff who resigned is going to spend the rest of his life, wrestling with the fact that he could have done something and he didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah. So much for that whole only the police need to have firearms.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to this. I think, what was his name? His last name is Hab. What's his first name?
Colton Hobb.
Colton Hobb. David
kind
is
of
the other
brings
one
us
we'll get
back
to.
to that, because that kid was, a victim of the Florida shooting, and he had wanted to go on in front of the town hall meeting, and because he wanted to advocate for having armed veterans at schools. But if I remember correctly, CNN would not allow him to go before cameras unless he would read off a script, and the script was very much anti-gun.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
Yep.
I mean that's to be expected from CNN.
Which goes to show that CNN they completely rig these. All of us here knew this, of course, but this is just proof here that CNN rigs all these town halls to bring across a left wing narrative to the public. And when this young student came out, a junior ROTC member, by the way, so good for him for being a junior ROTC member. I'm sure he'll be a great military serviceman someday. But he wanted to go up there and advocate for a different solution to this issue other than the left wing narrative of just further cutting away our Second Amendment rights. And he comes out on a different news station, I think a more local news station, and says like, no, they told me ahead of time, and I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. They told me ahead of time that I could write out some questions and ask questions to I think it was for Senator Marco Rubio. And ask him questions that I wanted to ask, but then when he showed up, they gave him a bunch of scripted questions. They said, no, you have to ask these questions. And then when he said that on the other news station, CNN was like, no, that's not true.
That's not what happened.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, going all the way back to when they were doing that with Donna Brazile, right? Donna Brazile was giving questions to the Hillary Clinton campaign ahead of the CNN debates, and as if you needed further proof. I mean, you also had at that same event they had Dana Lash, an NRA spokeswoman, there talk about like a rape victim who was a pro Second Amendment advocate of like a woman who says like, oh, I'm a gun rights advocate now because I wish I had a gun when I was attacked, and the whole audience, pretty much the whole audience, boos her for that and jeers at her and interrupts her, and as if you didn't need further evidence that the whole audience is stacked with just left-wing individuals, which just is further proof of their bias. And then this was, on top of all that, why those events are just total shams. I almost said something else starting with SH, but I'm cut myself off. They're total shams in comparison to like the town hall session Trump had, because if for nothing else, let's turn to the one and only, the almighty wise Greg Gutfeld, who had an amazing tweet, a very good tweet, not a joking one either, a serious one on this subject. He said, quote, "In an audience-driven event, speakers react to the possibility of applause. That changes debate." End quote. And he's so right. When you have this whole audience, and it's being broadcast on TV, you have, of course, these kids, these David Hoggs and Emma Gonzalez's, who just want to be famous and they want to get pity points, so they go for the applause lines rather than actually making intelligent arguments and being honest when they take on Marco Rubio, Dana Lash, and all these others.
Well, I would just say, that we'll get to Emma Gonzalez, but I wanted to go back to Colton, who said, and this is the quote from him, "I expected to be able to ask my questions and give my opinion on my questions." And he said, CNN had originally asked me to write a speech and questions, and it ended up all being scripted. And he wanted to, like Ian had said, he wanted to go forward and say, what schools should do is have armed veterans on their campuses. In some schools and some more like wealthy, like Jewish schools will have armed guards and things like that. And this is something that's been said before, is that we should have armed guards, and not just any armed guards. We should have veterans, because it's like a win-win. Employ our veterans who are reintegrating into society after coming back from wars, but of course, like we just said, he didn't get a chance to do that because it doesn't fit the narrative that all of these kids are outraged, that all of them are like copacetic with what's his name? The guy, he doesn't have a chin.
David Hogg.
Yeah, with him.
The guy with no jaw.
Emma Gonzalez. And it's ridiculous. And it's also perverse, because you see this Emma Gonzalez girl, and you see, like, she's clearly not okay. Like, she's traumatized. Like, right?
Yeah,
she's emotionally traumatized, and
she got the Britney Spears shaven head look going for her.
And you can tell, okay, like, let's be honest, you can tell that she had a bone to pick with conservatives, Republicans, Trump, and right wingers in general before this ever happened. And so you take someone who already had this like deep seated hatred for the right wing, for the Republicans, for the gun owners. You take that person who's just now undergone a horrendously traumatic event. Now, like that's pushed them to the point where they're essentially like an unstable, bit radical person, right? And then you put them in front of a sea of cameras, and you say, "Listen to this person. This is the greatest point of authority in the United States at this time, and we need to listen to them." And of course, what they're saying is, abolish the Second Amendment. Like it's disgusting because they don't like. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think people like at CNN and these politicos actually care about these victims. They care about what they pose, which is political power. Like they can use, like, and that's what progressives do. They politicize on tragedy. And I know that's like a gross generalization, but it's true. Whenever there's some horrible event, school shooting or whatever, there's always consistently the left is the first one to capitalize on it and soapbox and say, like this is why we need change now. Meanwhile, the rest of us are reserved, and we think that maybe it should be wise to give people time to grieve, because it's something as horrible has happened, and we don't immediately come out of the gate politicizing tragedy. At least not even. And when people on the right do, it's not nearly as vicious as people on the left who like the billboard signs popping up saying "Kill the NRA."
Oh my god! And even like Emma Gonzalez in particular, she was the one like. She got famous in her own right as a survivor of this because she delivered that speech. Well, number one, she becomes famous for using vulgarity. She's the one who says, "We call BS" over and over again. And one of her statements is quote, they say that quote unquote, they say that good guys with guns stop bad guys with guns. We call BS. And I'm just like,
okay,
really? Okay, you're shooting. How was your shooting stopped? Good guys with guns, the police showed up and stopped the shooter. Like
that kind of that. Well,
I think
go ahead, Ian.
Students are just they're so young, they're so naive,
right?
And honestly, like they really haven't taken the time to study firearms, to study the statistics of firearm violence in the United States, and to study the best preventative measures to stopping various different firearm violence situations in the United States. They're just filled with rage and emotion, and they're going off of that, and a lot of it's just nonsensical, and the left wing media is capitalizing off of that.
Right, and this all kind of ties in to at least everything that's been happening, and the response from the left every time something happens. It really shows that this isn't about. They claim it's about, well, some people claim it's about common sense gun control, but of course, Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, they're calling for just an outright abolition of the Second Amendment. But when you see that, okay, law enforcement, at least the first responder, we assume is the sheriff deputy because he had a whole 4 minutes to think about why he didn't want to go in the building. Okay, so we see there that law enforcement is not always able to do something right. Who do we think might be more capable? Okay, a veteran, like a combat veteran, right? And when that's presented as a possible solution, does not abolish the Second Amendment. It's rejected. It's not even rejected. It's not even allowed to be said. That brings us back to Colton, who says, well, it's like now that we've seen law enforcement kind of failed initially in stopping it, let's do something else. Let's put veterans there. Well, no, we don't want that because they don't want. It's not about common sense measures. It's not even. It's part of a much bigger problem, I think, or a much bigger question. But based on the fact that they won't even allow opinions that might be considered common sense, like putting armed veterans in schools, they won't even allow those opinions into the fray, really shows what this is about. And it is about getting rid of the Second Amendment. There's no argument about that.
That's the pure left-wing knee-jerk reaction. Is you have, for example, a couple days after the shooting, they had the Florida House voting on a bill to possibly ban guns, and it was thankfully shot down 70 votes against, 30 votes in favor. And they had, up in the gallery, some of the survivors, there's that one girl just crying and like, the next death with an assault rifle is gonna be on them! And I'm just watching this like, alright, yeah, your waterworks didn't make people give up their rights. You can go home and tell your parents that the answer is still no. Because that's the thing, too, is these kids, just gotta say it, these kids are definitely being used by the left.
They are.
Rush Limbaugh made a really good point on this. He wanted to stay away, in general, from talking about the kids, but it's worth mentioning. You have, within like 2 to 3 days after this shooting, you have this motley crew of like 16, 17-year-old kids suddenly organizing statewide and nationwide marches to the capital of Florida, to Washington, D.C., these lions, hundreds, thousands of students. They got co-sponsors with the Women's March, they've got set dates, they've got funding. 3 days after this happened, and it's all a bunch of 16-year-olds. And they're already pushing, it's a grassroots movement, it's social media, it's like the Arab Spring. No, it's definitely not.
The Arab Spring, that worked out well, didn't it?
I remember that.
It did. No, definitely.
It wasn't just Rush Limbaugh, too. It was, I'm pulling his name up right now. He was a GOP guy. He was on CNN, and it shocked everyone because he said that they're being coached by Democrats, and that the
former representative. I know who you're talking about.
Hijacked by left-wing groups.
Georgia
his Republican congressman.
Former congressman. I remember seeing
his last name is Kingston. Jack Kingston. That's what it is.
That's right.
He said it, and CNN was like shocked. Like, what do you mean they're being taken advantage of? Like, well, CNN, you're part of it. You're coaching people. You're telling people what to say. You're giving them scripts. Like,
there's that video of David Hogg forgetting his lines in an interview, and like, hey, can I do that line again? Like all that stuff.
Yeah, I love it. They play dumb, and this might get a little bit tangential, but this whole thing kind of plays into this like idea of adultism that we need to listen to the kids, and that by maybe not giving the keys to the kingdom to 9-year-olds and to teenagers, this is the same generation that had to be prevented from killing themselves by eating laundry
Tide
detergent.
Pods.
Right. This is Generation Tide Pod, and we're being told that we have to concede the keys to the kingdom to Generation Tide Pod, because to use things like I don't know, reason or restraint is like a form of adultism, that we're inferiorizing these kids by telling them, hey, maybe shredding the Constitution, hey, bud, you haven't been you don't know as much as you think you do. And it's like immediately, it's like, oh my God, that's so horrible. You're oppressing that child by telling them that they don't know what they're talking about.
This whole nouveau parenting thing is not
reverse helicopter parenting.
Yeah, I'd rather have a helicopter parent than,
Did
which
you
is
say helicopters?
also bad because you don't allow the kid to grow.
Right.
But like having the exact opposite is probably even worse.
Right.
It's
like, well, I let my kid put a saddle on my back and ride me around the house because I'm secure in my emasculated self. Like, it's ridiculous. And it's on CNN, you see these like. There always seems to be this like army of verified leftists on Twitter. I think I said CNN on Twitter. Mm-hmm. I don't know who they are, but they're all verified. And you see them, and they're like, I saw one that it instantly gave me cancer. He's wearing glasses, an Oxford shirt that just fits perfectly around his slender neck, and he said, "Kids dunking politicians is what this website was made for." And like I think I was driving. It's horrible. I think I was at a stoplight. We'll just say that I was at a stoplight. And I almost crashed my car afterwards because like it immediately gave me a headache and then cancer. And it's horrible because, and then again, if you say anything to these kids, like, and I actually had a debate in one of my classes this week after the shooting, and this guy who's unironically from Chicago and thinks gun control works. He is telling me that the problem is guns, just like the stuff he's heard on CNN. And so I'm like, well, that's not true. If you look at Switzerland and all these other Nordic countries, like Germany and Finland is another good example. And pretty much a lot of these Nordic countries have high per capita gun ownership, and they have far fewer shootings. Mm-hmm. Especially the Swiss. I mean, virtually every Swiss male has an assault rifle at home, but they experience far fewer shootings, right? And so what I was getting at is that it's a cultural and social problem that manifests as gun violence, right?
And he's just like, Governor of Kentucky, Matt Bevin said.
Right, and then I said in contrast, those safe Nordic countries like in Norway, 100 round drum magazines are legal. Either that or my friend is breaking the law in Norway. But
let me look up a plane ticket to Norway real quick.
and I said, okay, now compare those to Latin American countries like Mexico and even countries like Somalia that have really strict gun control. And I was like, how is it working out for them? And then he just kind of like threw his hands up and said, well, I don't care. He said you're using semantics, and I'm immediately like, okay, you just used the word semantics wrong, yeah. And he's like, you're using semantics and you're pro-gun and you're with the NRA, because I did make the mistake of saying I'm a member of the NRA. And he was like, you're wrong. Guns are the problem. And I said, so you would be okay with making me a felon overnight if you got to just shred the Second Amendment? And he said, yeah, because you would be a criminal. And I was like, you don't see a problem with making people like me a felon on a whim because you think guns are the problem? And he's like, no, you'd be a criminal. That's the law. And then I got kind of. And then I held back from saying how'd Chicago work out, but I referenced New York, and I said, cities like New York still have really high gun violence, even though they've cracked down on guns. And he's like, well, yeah, but it's okay because only criminals do it. And I just kind of stared at him, and I was like, wait, they have strict gun laws, but people still use guns to shoot each other because they're criminals, and they don't care that there are gun laws. He's like, yeah, but it's okay because it's just criminals doing it. And I was just like, you don't understand what I'm saying, do you? It didn't fix anything because
one thing, and I think we're kind of getting into the whole gun law thing and also all the new recent proposals
from Trump.
And one thing that I always point out to people that are gun control advocates is that the overwhelming majority of gun violence and gun crimes are committed with illegally purchased or stolen firearms, not legally purchased, and not not legally purchased ones. And the issue here, I mean, if you look at, I think I read a statistic somewhere, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. If you were to get rid of the cities of Chicago, Detroit, and like Washington D.C. and like remove them from the United States, the U.S. like the third
immediately becomes one of the safest countries in the world.
Yeah, hold on, that's clearly racist, Ian. That's just...
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude! Don't you know what
those cities are filled with inner city gangs that are in possession of either illegally purchased or stolen firearms, and that's where the vast majority of shootings occur, in inner city gang exchange.
That's dog whistle language, you racist. Are you in the alt-right or something?
I don't know what that word. I think that means that you're speaking at you're actually speaking in a higher frequency than I can understand you. But I think that white supremacists can pick up on that frequency.
Okay. Yeah, the facts are too inconvenient.
But that ties into the fact that one of the only shared characteristics among adolescent criminals are that it's more than 70% of them experienced more than 70% of adolescent murderers experienced little to no father involvement. More than 60% of all adolescent rapists experience little to no father involvement, and the majority, more than 70% of kids in juvie hall experience little to no father involvement. And it's like, where is that most prevalent? In inner cities, like you said.
Yeah,
not the least
that's
of
a whole other issue. But
we should just get rid of the Second Amendment. I think that'll fix the problem.
Oh, of course, and blame it on things that don't have anything to do with it. Like again, the SPLC will say, "Oh, it's the alt-right, it's white supremacy that's causing these mass shootings." Again, when I saw the reports, they're coming out saying, telling us that Nicholas De Jesus Cruz is a white supremacist, and I'm like, no.
And while we're on this, because I know that we could talk about how just it's stupid and asinine the gun control crowd is, but that was such harsh language. Just kidding. Trump, gun control.
Yeah.
Let's get into that.
To be entirely honest with you guys, I don't. Again, it's funny because Trump takes me on a roller coaster sometimes, and in the end, I sometimes I got to step back. Hey, I know he's doing the art of the deal. He's negotiating. Sometimes I have this initial, what are you doing, man?
Ye of little faith.
Yeah.
Ye of little faith.
Yeah. So, but what he's proposed, the bump stock ban. He's proposed raising the gun purchase age for rifles to age 21. Currently, you have to be 21 to purchase a pistol.
In some states, yeah.
Sorry?
I think in some states, 21 is already the standard, like California, for example.
At least in California. And, he's thinking about raising the age to 21, and then he talked about doing comprehensive background checks, and he wasn't very clear about that, but it could. A lot of people are speculating. I know Breitbart wrote an article saying that was tantamount to saying that he was alluding to a national gun registry, which is a bit of a stretch on their end.
Yeah, that's the culture crowd freaking out. That's honestly, he later emphasized in that tweet where he described like 3 pillars of his plan: the bump stock ban, the 21, and he wanted, for the background checks, it's raising the emphasis on mental illness and mental health as
and he shot down a ban on assault weapons almost immediately. But that's like the Ann Coulter is great, but she does concern post a little bit too much. Where anytime Trump, is wheeling and dealing, like the Ann Coulter crowd will kind of be like, the sky is falling, like Trump has let us down, and
the world is ending.
And I feel like I have a tendency to have the same reaction that Ann Coulter
does. We live in turbulent times, man. The age 21 thing, I don't know. I mean, he says he's going to push for it. Means that we might not get it, and who knows? Maybe him saying we're going to push for it is him just kind of like giving people the runaround.
You know what it is? It's just like what happened. Well, the run through we just got on the DACA thing. Trump had his DACA proposal with the 4 pillars.
That's what I was thinking about.
The amnesty quote unquote for 1.8 million. The wall fully funded $30 billion, and stricter enforcement, including ending catch and release, ending the visa lottery, and ending chain migration. And those were the 4 pillars of his plan. He would not back down on that. He used the fire and fury of his tweets to shoot down more moderate bills by McCain.
Hellfire tweets.
Yep. He shot down the moderate bills by the amnesty Republicans like McCain and Collins. And the Dems, and again, he's offering amnesty for up to 3 times as many as the Dems wanted.
We're going to get into immigration later, but let's keep this about gun control.
It's similar to that. It's a decent sounding deal. It sounds about right with what the Democrats wanted, but say it actually becomes legislation. It's put forward by Grassley or whoever. The Dems are going to spurg out and reject this one too. And once again, he can throw his hands up, wipe his hands clean, and say, "Hey, I tried to do something, and the Dems don't want it, so it's on them."
Right.
And I think that's exactly what he's going for.
That's kind of the feeling that I was getting too, because he says we're going to push hard for it. And as far as the bump stock goes, and the crowd seems pretty divided evenly between the age 21. Most people that own guns, and even staunch gunners, people that I know, are like, well, you need to be 21 to buy a handgun. So whatever. And what 18-year-old has? Well, I don't know. I'm sure ARs are much cheaper in the South than they are in California, where I live.
Probably.
Everything is cheaper.
Yeah, in the South, right?
California.
So okay, 21. We'll call it like a draw, because the crowd seems pretty split. On bump stocks, it seems like only people that are members of like the national, it's like NAGR. They're like the radical version of the NRA. I can't think of them. I mean, they actually spend more money than the NRA does. I think, even though they're a smaller operation.
Because I think the
National
NRA,
American Gun Rights Association.
I don't know. In the aftermath of the Vegas shooting, I think the NRA actually did endorse the idea of banning bump stocks. Because all they know are really, it's a cheap.
They did.
It's not a weapon.
They're like the first people to say that.
The bump stock itself is not a weapon, which the Second Amendment applies to weapons themselves. It's a cheap little accessory that, let's be honest, any gun enthusiast knows. All the bump stock does is increase firing rate at the cost of basically just screwing over your accuracy.
Everything else, right? And you can get the same effect from tying.
Yeah. If
you want to get autoerotic bump stock, tie like a leather belt around your neck and tie the other end to your stock, and you've got a bump stock, basically. The recoil will do the magic for you. So
that's the plot of the next novel in the 50 Shades of Grey series.
They are bump. No one cares about bump stocks except for the I don't know, the fundamentalist gunners, or the people that just want a bone to pick with Trump that are conservatives. Like, oh, this is first bump stocks, next the Second Amendment. It's like, no, dude, we're doing you a favor. Like, why would you waste money on a bump stock?
Exactly.
So okay, we'll call that. That's good Trump, right? Because the biggest thing with the bump stock, in my opinion, is that he's saying, you want a ban? Here's your ban. I'm going to ban something. So it's kind of like it's like he's throwing them a sock. Right, a soggy bone or a bone that's been dropped in dirt because it's a ban. So you can't say, well, he didn't do anything. Well, he did something. He banned something that was involved in a mass shooting in Vegas, right? So he did do something. So they can't say he didn't. So that's smart, and I think that maybe he thinks that too. Now the other thing is mental health.
Yep.
That's one thing that's hard to verify. You know, when it comes to checking someone's felony record or criminal record, you can do that. That's on the books. You know, that you can find that in on anyone's record when someone applies for a job. They do a criminal background check. You know, but in the case of mental health, the question is, where does one draw the line as to what's considered, someone that's ineligible or not eligible for a firearm ownership and someone that's eligible? If someone has mild OCD or mild ADD, would that bar someone from owning a firearm? I think that's terrible if that's the case. So if you're gonna do mental health background checks, you need to be very, very, very clear about what mental disabilities constitute as something that would bar one from owning a firearm. Something like schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder or severe autism or Down syndrome. Some obviously clear ones like that.
So the people from 4chan. So people on 4chan can't have guns. Because he said autism.
Yeah, basically all 4chan is banned from having guns. Well, and it's funny because, like, I'm hoping I'm on the same wavelength as Trump, but I think it's a good opportunity to focus on mental health conditions that are associated with sociopathic tendencies, which can usually be flagged by people that have been either accused or convicted. I mean, convicted is really the only way to find out, I think. But people that have been convicted of either animal abuse or domestic abuse, those are typically like the easiest ways to see that there's something there, And then you get into the whole like, well, what about bad faith claims? All right, well, let's leave the hypotheticals out. But typically, especially animal abuse, I mean, like that's universally like known as like a red flag for someone that is a bit of a sociopath. And there are conditions like schizophrenia, any sort of mental health condition that makes someone prone to violent outbursts or makes them incapable of restraining their emotions. And there are things that are pretty like, should someone who's a violent schizophrenic have a gun? No, like that's an easy, like it's a given. It shouldn't be that hard. And but this brings us back to something that Trump did earlier, and it's funny because I've got his tweet right. His name is Trymaine Lee, Trymaine, last name Lee. Trymaine. All right, Trymaine. He tries to. It's a woke tweet. He's like, President Trump calls for focus on mental health after 18th mass shooting. We can get into that too, because that is also a blatant lie.
Oh yeah.
But he says, but wait, Trump signed bill revoking Obama-era gun checks in the past. What Trump did was what Ian was talking about. This Trump shot down a bill that would have robbed people with benign mental health conditions. Like I don't know. Give me something that's benign. That could be essentially right. Okay, boom. It's like what Trump shot down was a bill that would have prevented people with these benign mental health conditions like OCD or ADD, whatever, from being able to own a gun. That it was like kind of a blanket. Like if you have this like huge smorgasbord, one of these things that is considered a mental health condition because it's essentially a chemical imbalance in your head, right? You have it, can't get a gun. It would have robbed people who could have had a gun of their due process of owning of being able to appeal or even own a firearm in the first place. Like I know a girl who she takes pills for something that she has, what's considered a mental health condition, but she's not a violent person, and she's someone who believes that a firearm could someday save her life. And this Obama era bill could have very well potentially robbed her of being able to own a firearm. So that's what Trump shot down. And so what I'm hoping is that he kind of comes back to that. Like, first he allows people with these benign mental health conditions to own firearms, does not screw them over like this Obama-era bill would have done. Then he shifts this, or he focuses mental health on people that are, say, like violently schizophrenic or things like that. Things that we really should be flagging people for. So, like, again, this is speculation, but I'd like to think that the president and I are on the same wavelength.
At the end of the day, it's something that can be hammered out in the legislative process for when we get down to the particulars. And above all else, it's something the GOP has been pushing for a long time, because it's going back to the shooter, not the gun, not the accessories, not the amount of bullets you have in a clip, a magazine. It's focusing on the actual causes. Like, for example, you look back at this particular guy, Nicholas de Jesus Cruz, they'll try to, the media's trying to say, oh, he was all right, he was white supremacist. Well, clearly, he had, it is mental health. There's plenty of things obviously wrong with him. And how many times has he reported to the FBI and law enforcement?
Twice.
When he went on YouTube and said, LOL, I'm going to shoot up a school, I want to be a professional school shooter.
No.
And nothing, no. So, we definitely need to emphasize the laws that are already on the books. And the FBI, like Trump said in a tweet, that was one of my favorite tweets of his, when he said, maybe if the FBI is focusing more on serious domestic terrorist threats and not on, fake Russian collusion scandals, they actually could have prevented this. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about the shooter, it's about the person, it's not about the guns, it's not about the bump stocks. I mean, although bump stocks, again, are stupid, but that's where the emphasis should be, and Trump knows that, and that's why it's really smart.
And we'll get more into the FBI and their ability to deflect things that they really should be held accountable for. But this is my favorite, because I actually had a class where I got into a debate with a classmate about this. They're like, well, we've had 18 mass shootings and 18 school shootings and like more than 30 mass shootings, and it's only February. It's like, okay, and I asked them, can you name off the instances of mass shootings? Like, do you know? I basically asked them, do you know what you're talking about? And they were like, well, no, but it's in the news. And I was like, okay, well, let me give you an example of what qualifies as a mass shooting. A man shot a pellet gun at a school bus, shattering a window. No one was hurt. That was a school shooting. A man committed suicide. And these are actually, I'm looking at a list right now in front of me. A man committed suicide in an elementary school parking lot when no one was at the school. That was a school shooting. A college student, presumably training either for a firearm course or maybe a police academy kind of course at Grayson College, accidentally discharged a handgun during training.
Yep.
No one was hurt. That was a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Only of these, the number you're saying of the 18 school shootings, I actually have 19 now, including Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Only 2 of them qualify as actual
mass.
There was one in Kentucky,
Yep.
weeks last month, and then
where a student was shot and killed in the chest by it was some ex-girlfriend. Somebody slept with someone's high school girlfriend, and so someone got shot for it. It's ridiculous.
The ex-boyfriend that she cheated on went back.
Yeah, 2, including the one in Florida. Of the 19 alleged school shootings, which literally are people a pellet gun shooting that qualifies as school shooting. Of the 19, only 2 are actual these types of shootings, and it's horrible because having to get into this discussion and dissect this bogus narrative, it's a little bit disgusting that you have to actually get into it. You know what I mean?
Is banking on the public to buy into when the average person's not going to take the time to look up. Okay, let me look up these 19 school shootings. Oh wait, a guy with a pellet gun where no one got hurt.
Right,
exactly.
The average person isn't going to look that up, so they're just going to take what CNN or MSNBC Hee-Haw takes for granted, or tells them.
Right, and then before we get into the FBI thing, the other thing I wanted to comment on was the mass shootings. That was another thing that got me, and I asked them. I asked my classmate, "Do you know what a mass shooting is?" And they said, "Well, it's where tons of people die in Vegas." And I said, "No, a mass shooting is any incident in which 4 or more people are shot in a single location, and they don't actually need to die for it to be classified as such." And and I asked them, "Where do you think a lot of these so-called mass shootings happen?" If for instance, in Chicago, more than 70 people were shot in a single weekend in Chicago. And Chicago has strict gun control, but nobody cares when these so-called mass shootings happen in inner cities. We don't it because I don't know. It can't be.
And
it
with
can't be
handguns
politicized.
too. Those shootings are almost entirely with handguns instead of rifles or shotguns.
Right. It's
overwhelmingly handguns. And for a long period of time, until the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, the city of Chicago, I believe, banned handguns.
Right.
And then that was deemed unconstitutional. And during that ban period, handgun-related deaths
went up.
Of course they did.
I remember Obama was like celebrating, like, we got rid of guns, we saved Chicago. Was it Chicago or Baltimore? They like celebrated like ridiculous Obama like blanket ban on guns, and either in Chicago or Baltimore. And like fast forward a year or two, and they had an event called "Nobody Shoot Anybody."
Oh, I remember that.
It was like a ceasefire,
and
of
how many
course people got shot.
Yeah,
because it's like. It's
like when the Pope comes to visit Mexico and all the cartels decide to have a ceasefire for 2 weeks and then they start killing each other again.
Like lasted like 2 hours. And, but that's the thing, is like the fact that I have to explain to people what mass shootings are and what what school shootings are, and that I have it kind of feels like you get your hands dirty because you have to, like, I don't know, it takes away from actual tragedy. You know what I mean?
And these are the same people that are voting, at the same polling stations as us.
Yeah, as one of my foreign policy, one of my international policy professors in college loved to say this phrase. He got this line from someone else, I forget who, but a classic phrase, quote, "The masses are asses." That the majority of people are just dumb and don't know what they're talking about. They're spoon-fed information by the media that they don't question without thought. I mean, that's fake news, and that's absolutely, you're right. The mass media, which is left-wing.
It's the slogan of this podcast: "The masses are asses."
Yep.
That's what we should call it.
That's right. That's what we're gonna call it. The masses are asses.
He said that so many times in class.
Let's really quick. Let's touch on the MPI's or MPI. I think I was thinking of NPR. The FBI's like incredible ribbon dance performing of deflecting blame. Ian, do you want to get this going?
Oh, are you referring to the tip that the YouTuber gave the FBI a couple months ago?
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
It was multiple tips, wasn't it?
No. What happened was there was a YouTuber, I can't remember the guy's name.
This was long, I don't know. Yeah.
But he apparently Nicholas Cruz, under the same name.
Nicholas Cruz.
His real name on YouTube. Great job.
His handle was Nicholas Cruz.
Good job, guys.
On a YouTube channel saying something that I'm paraphrasing to. I plan on being a mass shooter.
No, I'll pull it up right now.
A professional school shooter.
The YouTuber of which Nicholas Cruz commented on his video, that YouTuber reported that to the FBI tip line and on their website, and they never acted. And now there's all these allegations of who's to blame, and here's the thing. I have respect for the FBI. I think most Americans do.
There are patriots in the FBI that are doing good work.
Yeah.
I think here's the deal. No organization is without its flaws. Right. No organization has the ability to fully carry out its mission 120% of the time without any mistakes. And there are individuals and criminals that fall through the cracks. That's simply the reality of things. The military makes mistakes. There's collateral damage. When the US Army or the U.S. Air Force accidentally bombs, a civilian area, does that mean that the U.S. Air Force or the U.S. Army is the most terrible organization in the world? No, they made a mistake.
According to the feminist girl in my history class, yes. But continue.
Yeah. But the deal is with this is the FBI messed up. They totally screwed up, and they've been making a lot of mistakes lately. Especially with all the whole investigation with the Russia collusion and all that, and then the texts between the two agents. The whole that makes them look really bad, and has really shaken the faith in the American public with the FBI's integrity. That doesn't mean the FBI isn't a professional organization that protects America, but in the last few months or so, their image has definitely taken a beating. And I believe the individuals that did neglect the individuals within the FBI that did neglect this tip that was given should have acted, and they didn't. And whatever methods that the FBI have of punishing or reprimanding the individuals that did neglect this tip that was given, I think that should be followed through.
Right.
But it's very difficult to place blame or to say that the FBI is incompetent, because I surely don't think they are. I just think that it's the U.S. is such a huge country with so many different issues that not everything can be really not every criminal or not every bad guy.
No. And that's consistent with consistent with. I'll let Eric talk, and then I'll give my take. And my take's probably going to be very similar to Eric, judging by how he can hardly refrain from talking over you as you play.
As you give way too much credence to the FBI, but you go first.
Because somebody has to be the good cop. But
one good cop, two bad cops. Two bad cops.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say. It's kind of funny how it's come almost full circle for the FBI. Don't forget, it was founded and led for decades by one J. Edgar Hoover, who turned the thing into a federally subsidized mafia, basically, where he gathered dirt on everyone who was anyone, presidents, congressmen, senators, and he used it personally, used intimidation tactics, blackmail, and he really ran the country. As it was said in the movie Nixon, Nixon said, there's two people you don't F with, and that's J. Edgar Hoover and Dick Helms. Dick Helms at the CIA, I believe. But, these guys, they run the country. And you look at how the FBI now is, where the FBI and the DOJ, at least under Obama, was colluding, quote-unquote, with foreign officials, like Christopher Steele, the ex-British crazy spy, to try to ruin Trump and make sure he didn't get elected. And then after he wins, ponying up this phony investigation against him to delegitimize his presidency. So it's almost come full circle. And sure, maybe the FBI was good for a while, but as of right now, I would argue it's definitely leaning more back towards that political subterfuge and corruption that defined it in its earliest days. And that's just one more reason, and above incompetence as well, which is why, of course, Florida's Governor Rick Scott called on the FBI director to resign over this.
Well, so, and my take on this is it's actually, I think mine's worse than yours.
Here we go.
So here's what we know. The FBI was tipped off in September by the vlogger who reported the comment that reads verbatim, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." That is the comment that Nicholas Cruz made, and his YouTube handle that he made that comment with was Nicholas Cruz. He was reported for that. The FBI didn't follow up. In January, someone close to Nicholas Cruz reported him to the FBI concerning gun ownership. This is the quote: "Gun ownership, desire to kill people, erratic behavior, and disturbing social media posts, as well as the potential of him conducting a school shooting." That is verbatim. And the FBI did not follow up with that. So they didn't follow up in September. They didn't follow up in January. And it turns out that the police were actually called to to Cruz's house 39 times over the last 7 years.
That's right.
If you want to be like, well, where are his parents? Well, his dad died when he was really young, and his adoptive mother died 3 months ago. So, I mean, you can kind of figure out what was going on at his house, right? And so, okay, so there's giving them the benefit of the doubt, and they're just like, what happened? Like, what more? If we're supposed to, again, because if this gun or Second Amendment abolition movement is predicated on the feds and law enforcement keeping us safe, what is this? Like, someone was clearly planning to do a school shooting, and civilians did everything they could. They worked in within the infrastructure that's there for them to prevent this from happening, and the only people that didn't do their job were the authorities. So where does that leave us? Who are we supposed to rely on? I mean, clearly we can't rely on the FBI, and that's actually one of the other things that's been consistent in a lot of these shootings. Orlando was one. Charleston was another one. The Sutherland shooting. I think off the top of my head, there's 5 shootings mass shootings that I can think of.
Las Vegas.
Very recently, Vegas, where the FBI was tipped off beforehand and did nothing. So, like, I understand they get a mountain of threats, a mountain of credible threats, but I feel like at this point, shooting should be a priority, especially school shootings. So when they're not acting up, when they get 2 tips about the same person, in the case of Nicholas Cruz, and they're not doing anything. What is going on? What is the focus of the FBI that prevents them from doing that? And if you look at before Jim Comey was shown the door, to give you an idea of like how much manpower and focus might be on this Russian collusion investigation, it's reported that Comey had asked for more manpower and more resources, like financial resources, to focus on this Russian collusion investigation. So that tells you that if the FBI is focusing so much on investigating the non-existent ties between Russian collusion and President Trump, and that the director of the FBI at the time has to ask for more people and more funding, that kind of tells you where their priorities are. And somewhat related, Mueller's investigation itself, I looked it up, did some reading, and I found that Mueller's investigation has blown $1.7 million on the salaries of its personnel, $733,000 on equipment, $363,000 on rent utilities, $223,000 for travel, and $157,000 for contract services. So that tells you why our federal authorities might be dropping the ball. But like Ian said, there are good guys there. Like the guy that came forward after the Uranium One scandal, the FBI agent who came forward under the condition of anonymity. Right. But that tells you. But the fact that he said, "I'm only doing this under the condition of anonymity," and when he was asked why, or his lawyer was asked why, she said because he was intimidated by FBI leadership and the Obama administration at the time to keep his mouth shut. So that tells you that, like, for the worst aspects of these agencies always get into the positions of leadership, and then you have these agents like this guy that came forward anonymously that are patriots who are literally, they have a choice, either quit their job or keep their mouth shut. Like, that's the option that they have. It's absolutely insane. And my final take on this is that when it was revealed that the FBI had dropped the ball not once but twice, it seems a little bit convenient that Rosenstein announces right after, everyone's destroying the FBI, saying you're at least partially responsible for this. Right after that happens, Rosenstein announces, "Hey, we've caught 13 Russians that are indicted for meddling," whatever the hell that means, right? And then media focus shifts off the FBI back onto Russian collusion, and they haven't looked back since. The mainstream media has not looked back at the FBI since Rosenstein conveniently announced that they've nabbed 13 Russians who are hiding under the president's bed.
Even though that in and of itself was a total nothing burger. Nothing.
Yeah, right. It actually proved those 13 indictments actually proved that there is no Russian collusion. It's just, but again, call me Alex Jones, but the timing seems a little bit convenient, and it at least had its effect. You can't say that it didn't have it did not have that consequence, because tell me that the media has gone back to lampooning the FBI. That's not true. It's only about gun control. It's only about Trump. There's the heat is off the FBI.
It is, and that's just way too convenient for them, and it allows them to continue to be incompetent while, like you said, the focus is on guns and on Trump. And I remember one of those students, they had a dumb little panel, 5 of the survivors, Hogg and Gonzalez were among them, and they mentioned the FBI or something, and one of the students said, "Well, Trump is in charge of the FBI, so this is on him." And I'm just like,
right, yeah.
Oh my God.
Trump has been all of the presidents, all of them. He's from beginning of this nation, from the inception of the FBI until now, Trump has been responsible for them. Is essentially that argument, right?
It's just
so I know we can lampoon the FBI all night. The other thing that I want to talk about that came up in the news was that USCIS has dropped "Nation of Immigrants" from its mission statement.
Ooh.
What thoughts? Give me your thoughts.
It's about
hot thoughts.
It's about time.
Yeah.
It's about damn time.
Now, hold on just a sec. Let me find the.
You put on your tinfoil hat because we've spent the last 20 minutes.
I'm taking a tinfoil hat off and go back to the
bashing.
I'm gonna get my clean water.
You guys not broadcasting from your bunker?
The old statement for the USCIS I have in front of me here says USCIS secures America's promise as a nation of immigrants by providing accurate and useful information to our customers, granting immigration and citizenship benefits, promoting an awareness and understanding of citizenship, and ensuring the integrity of our immigration system. It has now changed to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services administers the nation's lawful immigration system, safeguarding its integrity and promise by efficiently and fairly adjudicating requests for immigration benefits while protecting Americans, securing the homeland, and honoring our values.
God, that's like music to my ears.
So beautiful.
It's so night and day, the difference between the two.
It's glorious,
I feel like
man.
The first statement, I feel like your lecture. I feel you might as well be my English professor on that first statement.
America first, baby.
Obviously, the change in the mission statement is window dressing. It doesn't actually do anything, but it makes a very, very blunt statement by the Trump administration and by L. Francis Cisna, the USCIS director, CIS director. That we are going to prioritize American citizens first over bringing in a flood of immigrants from, wherever and, from all over the world, and how we need to prioritize our people first and foremost. And I think that is a much needed change because as the United States brings in more immigrants per year than the rest of the world combined, and it's time that we update our extremely outdated immigration system to a more modern, merit-based immigration system at the very least.
And Cisna's statement reflects that. He says that we are also responsible for ensuring that those who naturalize are dedicated to this country, share our values, assimilate, and understand their responsibility to preserve our way of life, essentially. So it is. I mean, it is window dressing, but the director of USCIS has said that this is a paradigm shift. The days of America not being able to dictate who may enter and who may not, under which conditions they may remain in good status in the United States. Those days are, they're numbered. I hope, anyways. But I mean, that's Cisna saying that. That's which is great.
You know what that is? That's going back to the talk about assimilation and really becoming Americanized. That's going back to what Teddy Roosevelt talked about in the criteria for bringing new immigrants. But most importantly,
before that, man.
Yeah, because most importantly, what it's doing is it's proving, hey, if we just enforce the laws that are on the books, we can really turn this thing around and get stuff done. And that's what I've been saying for a while now. This whole gun control debate, it's all a great big distraction. Here's the real Alex Jones conspiracy theory for you. This gun control debate is all total distraction from the fact that Democrats are about to lose everything on immigration. Because remember, March 5th is the DACA expiration date. We had all those 4 big immigration bills just got shot down in the Senate. No deal. It's back to the drawing board for both parties. But again, kind of like with the GOP and the tax plan, the Dems have the deadline to meet here on this. If they don't get something, that's like 700,000 potential new Democratic operatives gone, and their base is furious. And they know it. And they're like, oops, well, we're about to lose bigly on this one. Let's turn to gun control. Yeah, because we can win on that one.
Bigly.
We can win on that one. So the point being that at the end of the day, I think the Brexit mantra remains true on DACA, that no deal is better than a bad deal. And just the pure expiration of DACA with no replacement is still a net positive for us. It's a net positive for Trump. It's one more win we can add to our resume going into the midterms. And it makes the Democrats look awful. And I think that that's why, this is proof. Again, even little things like this, the shifting the mission statement, is that things are about to get a lot more serious. That even if a new law isn't passed, even if the system itself isn't really reformed, just enforcing the laws we have, which is something Obama sure wasn't doing, enforcing the laws we have can accomplish what Trump said he would do as far as immigration goes.
It's weird. Obama's a weird guy. He did deport. I mean, that's why brown people call him the deporter in chief. But at the same time, he didn't. It's weird. The whole presidency was a shit show, for lack of a better term.
Indeed.
But it goes beyond Teddy Roosevelt. If you look back to Alexander Hamilton, who said that the welfare of the republic depends on the people in it sharing a national sentiment, on a uniformity of principles and behaviors, and that's essentially assimilation. I remember the Heritage Foundation did a really good article on the concept of patriotic assimilation, and my father, who came here in the 1950s, he came here not to change the country. He didn't come here because he he had a bone to pick with America. Like, he came here because he admired the country, and he came here because he wanted to, not because he needed to. But he came here because he admired it for what it was. And when he saw, myself and my siblings embrace this nation and its culture, my sister nearly got brainwashed in college by the good old Mecha, which is like a subsidiary of La Raza. Yeah, God. But I fortunately I didn't. She's okay though. She's recovered from her days of the indoctrination camp.
That's good.
But it made my father really happy that he saw how patriotic I was, and that's dying though. That whole concept of patriotic assimilation that's dying, and it has to do with this. What progressivism is pushing, which ties into multiculturalism, which essentially the whole thing is that America is not allowed to have an identity, that its identity needs to be defined by diversity, a lack of identity. Well, and that's misleading, because we know that the left, essentially, when they talk about tolerance and diversity, it's like, well, it's diversity of everything except thought, diversity of everything except opinion, and tolerance. In Herbert Marcuse, I think he taught at Brandis. He laid this. He outlined it. It was called Liberating Tolerance, which called for, and he was a humanities professor, and he called for tolerance for everything, all the ideas and concepts and sentiments from the left, and intolerance, vehement, like militant intolerance, for all the ideas, concepts, and notions of the right. So it's the fact that USCIS is taking a stand, or trying to take a stand with the president, and reflecting this America first, no, we do have an identity, and it is not defined by just infinite amounts of diversity that we all know what that means. It's pretty, what a time to be alive is how I would summarize it. But it's great because it's taken of course it's always well, that's dog whistling. America first is dog whistling for white national. It's I'm not white. I'm not I'm not white, and I'm so happy that Trump is fighting for the idea, or the identity of this nation. Because at the end of the day, depending on how well you're assimilated, if you're like me, and even for people that aren't assimilated, the problems of this nation are everyone's problems. Regardless of what your skin color is or what your creed is, you know what I mean? And so this whole America first literally means, whether you like it or not, if you live in America, this puts you first. But there's a whole other argument for the illegal immigrants and DACA and Dreamer people, but for the most part, America first for the American citizens, regardless of color, creed. It means they get you're coming first, and we're seeing that. But I could talk about identity all night, but I think, like I said, what a time to be alive, that immigration is shifting toward, yes, we have an identity, and we will assert that identity.
It's a great time to be alive indeed. As the saying goes, the earth is however many billions of years old, and we are alive during the Donald Trump presidency.
During
the Donald Trump presidency.
Born too late to crusade.
Oh.
Born too early to explore the stars.
Yeah,
but just in time to browse dank Donald Trump memes.
Yes, 4chan Reddit for days, my friends.
All right. Well, I think it's a good place to end.
Yeah, let's end it there before I start ranting about identity.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more we'll talk about next time then.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, all right. This is fun, and I hope that everyone who was unfortunate or foolish enough to listen had enjoyed what they heard. All right, later, guys.
Later.
Bye.